Let's talk a little bit about major tech hubs in the US. So, unfortunately, depending on where you are in the US and what kind of geographic community you're involved with, the tone, the energy, the type of investor, the general kind of ecosystem experience that you're going to have is going to vary very drastically. The big areas that I want you to focus on, just so you have a general sense, and more of these cities and areas are popping up every day. These are a lot of the what are called tier one cities. So the places where, oh, there is absolutely a large, active, vibrant, and growing startup ecosystem. So left to right, of course, you've got Seattle, Washington, which if you're reading any sort of articles, you're going to see plenty of startups coming out of there. You, of course, have California, Silicon Valley, LA, and many, of course, areas in between with varying sizes and focuses. Denver, Colorado, not too surprising there. Lots and lots of startups, founders, investors, VCs. Austin, Texas has, of course, been getting a lot of attention for the last couple of years and has been growing and expanding and succeeding a lot. And then, of course, you have the classics: New York, Boston, lots of different investors, lots of wealthy individuals, lots of startup founders, and good schools. Clearly, there's a lot of different areas where you can engage in the startup community, regardless of where you're based in the country. And just because you're in a place that's not near one of these places, or even if you're in a place that is one of these places, it doesn't mean that it's the best place for you. And it doesn't mean it's the only place you can get value. There are plenty of cities that will never get mentioned that have tons of value for you to extract from. And there are tons of cities that are second, third tier cities, air quotes, third tier cities, but they still have tons of founders, tons of community, tons of people desperate to help and grow and support and do all these things. So don't live in a binary of, if it's not in one of these cities, it's not right. But understand that these cities may operate a little bit differently than other places in the country. And let's talk a little bit about what those differences are. So, major tech hubs are functionally different. And they're different because there's been a community that's been there and engaging and growing and developing. It's kind of like a group think, but for the positive. It's one of those startups are working here. So, however we do startups in our way is going to continue to get done in that way over time, because it's very Darwinism. It's the best fit. And this is survival of the fittest. Fittest, not strongest, but best fit, as in has enough kind of day-to-day success to warrant continuing to do it in that way. So when I look at the average, major tech hub, I definitely want to be engaged and do research in all of them, but I want to understand which one or which ones are especially beneficial to a given startup. Is it that area is especially receptive to that industry, that business model? There's certain early stage investors or activities or large companies like mine that are coming out of certain spaces that it would be beneficial for me to either lean into or lean away from. Lots of questions. But it's not a bad thing that they're different, because often you have to imagine being in a city that has no early stage investors and being in a city that's built on early stage investors. If you're an early stage company, one is definitely going to be easier to raise capital in, especially, assuming that you don't have revenue. But that doesn't mean that just because you go to the place that has easier capital that you're going to get access to it. You still have to have an idea, a business, a team, and everything worth investing in. So understand they're different. Understand they can be, better in certain ways, but better has a cost in other ways. Next, it's far less of where you are and far more of what room you're in. You can be in amazing, like very geographically condensed or just like dense startup community areas and talk to no one of value. And likewise, you can be in rooms or kind of places where the startup kind of temperature is a little bit lukewarm, but you're in the right room and the network that you're with, surprisingly enough, drives a ton of value. Now, the nice thing about this is you don't really have to worry if you have a network or not, because much like anything else, networks can be built. But you do have to understand, what city am I in? What region am I in? What state am I in? What network do I have? And what am I trying to get out of it? What value am I giving? What value am I asking for? And what rooms do I want to be in? And how can I, of course, beg, borrow, not steal, but beg, borrow, and be scrappy to get there. And we'll talk more about those strategies, but in the beginning, even just understanding it and reflecting on it can be very, very helpful. Secret sauce thing to keep in mind: like attracts like, which means when you're trying to build a network, the best thing you can do is relate to people, because people like to help people that they like, but people that are like them. And surprise, surprise, if you relate to someone, they're more inclined to like you. The last piece is, do not be afraid to travel. I have to talk to, many, many founders. I get the opportunity to, and I always have to encourage them that just because we're based in Florida, or just because we're in Arizona or in New York or wherever it might be, doesn't mean that's the only place that you can build, grow, engage your network, engage your customers, talk to investors. You have a reason to be out there in the world, because your startup is going to cover more than just the 10 miles that you operate with, in on the day to day. Using conferences, using trade shows, using events, using large startup kind of community gatherings. All of these can be incredibly helpful for learning about cities, learning about your industry, making great connections, and of course, experiencing what different types of cities look like and how some might be value add in one way and others might be value add in another. A little extra secret sauce: one of my favorite ways to network is to travel to places, and then I always have an excuse to meet people, because then I just say, hey, I'm in town for X conference. I'd love to grab a coffee or hop on the phone for 15 minutes and learn more about you and your work. And because I'm now connected to the conference and relevant to be in the city, those that are open to networking and engaging are going to respond in a positive way. So just by being willing to show up and willing to send a little standard copy paste message, all of a sudden my startup or my client startups are completely different, because one conversation can change everything. So hopefully now you have a little bit better of a sense of, when we're talking about the geography of startups and we're talking about different hubs, what we mean and what we're looking at, and the fact that just because you're not in one doesn't mean that it's a loss by any means.